This is not me. I'm fighting for my life.
Some careers don't end with an arrest. They end with a microphone turned on, a single interview, one question asked too directly, one answer that couldn't be walked back. In this video, you'll see the exact moments when public figures lost control of the narrative. Live, uncut, and irreversible. No scandals unfolding slowly. No rumors spreading in private. Just cameras rolling and reputations collapsing in real time. Once these interviews aired, everything changed. Number 1, R. Kelly. The interview that erased all doubt. For years, R. Kelly existed in a strange limbo between accusation and denial. By the early 2000s, allegations of sexual misconduct involving underage girls had followed him relentlessly. In 2002, he was indicted. In 2008, he was acquitted. And for many fans, that verdict was enough to keep listening, enough to believe the controversy was unresolved, complicated, or exaggerated. Then came the interview. During a televised conversation addressing those long-standing accusations, Kelly was asked a question that should have been simple, a question that demanded clarity, not performance. Instead of a direct response, he paused and asked for clarification. When you say teenage, how are we talking? That moment landed like a hammer. The interviewer froze. Viewers at home froze. And in seconds, the carefully maintained ambiguity surrounding Kelly's image collapsed. What made the moment so damaging wasn't volume or anger. It was the casual tone, the hesitation, the implication embedded in the question itself. To many watching, it sounded less like confusion and more like a window into how he viewed the allegations. The interview didn't introduce new evidence. It didn't contain a confession, but it changed the way people heard him. Clips spread rapidly. The line was replayed, quoted, debated, and dissected across news outlets and social media. Even those who had defended him for years struggled to explain it away. The interview became a reference point, not for what was legally proven, but for how Kelly presented himself when confronted directly. From that moment forward, his public image never recovered. The performance no longer mattered. The music could no longer exist separately from the questions surrounding him. What had once been framed as controversy hardened into suspicion, and suspicion into rejection. That single exchange didn't end his career overnight, but it ensured that every future accusation would be viewed through a far harsher lens. The interview didn't convict him in court. It convicted him in the court of public perception. Number 2, Prince Andrew, the interview that ended a royal role. For decades, Prince Andrew lived behind the protective shield of royalty. As a senior member of the British royal family, controversy rarely touched him directly. And when it did, it was usually softened by distance, silence, or protocol. That protection held firm until one decision changed everything: agreeing to a televised interview. When Prince Andrew sat down with the BBC's Newsnight to address his connection to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, the goal was clear. This was meant to be damage control, a chance to clear the air, to explain, to restore credibility. What followed instead has since been described by critics as one of the most disastrous interviews in modern public life. From the opening moments, the tone felt wrong. Asked about his relationship with Epstein, Prince Andrew appeared calm, almost detached. He insisted he had no recollection of ever meeting his accuser, Virginia Roberts Giuffre, despite a widely circulated photograph showing the two together. The denial landed heavily, not because it was shouted, but because it was delivered so plainly. As the interview continued, the damage deepened. Prince Andrew stated that he did not regret his friendship with Epstein, suggesting that it had provided useful opportunities. He offered explanations that struck viewers as evasive rather than reassuring, technical rather than human. At no point did the conversation shift toward visible empathy or accountability. Instead, each answer seemed to raise more questions than it resolved. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Across the UK and beyond, the interview was labeled a car crash. Media outlets replayed key moments on loop. Commentators from across the political spectrum expressed disbelief at how poorly it had gone. What shocked viewers most wasn't just what Prince Andrew said. It was how little he appeared to understand how his words would be received. Within days, the consequences followed. Prince Andrew stepped back from public duties. His charitable affiliations dissolved. His role within the royal family effectively ended. not through a court ruling, but through public pressure made impossible to ignore. The interview did not establish guilt or innocence, but it did something just as final. It stripped away the protective distance of royalty and placed Prince Andrew under the same unforgiving spotlight as everyone else, where his words once spoken could no longer be taken back. Number 3, Lance Armstrong, the confession that shattered a legend. For years, Lance Armstrong was more than a champion. He was a symbol. A cancer survivor who returned to dominate professional cycling, Armstrong represented resilience, discipline, and redemption. As rumors of doping followed him through multiple Tour de France victories, he denied them relentlessly, often aggressively. Lawsuits were filed, accusers were discredited, and for a long time his narrative held, until the interview where denial finally collapsed. In 2013, Armstrong sat down with Oprah Winfrey for a highly anticipated televised conversation. By then, the United States Anti-Doping Agency had stripped him of all his Tour de France titles dating back to 1998. Sponsors had already begun pulling away. This interview wasn't about winning public favor. It was about confronting the truth head-on. And Oprah asked the question directly. Yes or no, did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance? Yes. The answer landed with a finality that years of investigation had failed to achieve. Armstrong went on to admit to using multiple banned substances, including blood doping and testosterone. He acknowledged that his success had been built on systematic cheating. However, he denied forcing teammates to dope or bribing officials to conceal positive test results. Lines he continued to draw even as the broader deception unraveled. What made the interview devastating wasn't just the confession, it was the contrast. For over a decade, Armstrong had positioned himself as a victim of false accusations, even attacking former teammates and journalists who questioned him. Seeing that same figure calmly confirm the allegations on national television forced audiences to reassess everything that had come before. The fallout was swift and irreversible. Major sponsors, including Nike, severed ties. His charity distanced itself. The image of the inspirational survivor was replaced by that of a disgraced athlete who had built an empire on lies. Millions of fans who once defended him felt personally betrayed. The interview didn't merely close a chapter, it rewrote his entire legacy. No courtroom verdict had ever carried this much weight. No leaked document had ever done this much damage. Because once Lance Armstrong said yes, the story was no longer about rumors, rivals, or investigations. It was about a legend who finally admitted the truth and lost everything the moment he did. Number 4, Michael Jackson, the interview that changed everything. By the early 2000s, Michael Jackson was already one of the most scrutinized figures on the planet. Decades of global fame had turned his private life into a constant source of speculation. But nothing prepared the public for what unfolded in 2003 with the broadcast of the documentary Living with Michael Jackson, filmed by journalist Martin Bashir. The interview was meant to humanize him. Instead, it did the opposite. During the program, Jackson spoke openly about the abuse he said he endured at the hands of his father while growing up. For many viewers, this was a rare and painful moment of vulnerability, but the tone of the documentary shifted dramatically when the conversation turned to his relationships with children. Jackson acknowledged that children had stayed overnight in his bedroom. He described the practice as innocent, rooted in what he believed was a pure and childlike sense of companionship. When Bashir pressed him on whether he understood why people might find this concerning, Jackson appeared genuinely puzzled. Yes, he said, confirming that children shared his bedroom. When asked why that might alarm parents, he responded by suggesting that such concerns came from ignorance. That exchange sent shockwaves around the world. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets replayed the footage repeatedly, and public opinion shifted almost overnight. What Jackson intended as honesty was widely interpreted as a stunning lapse in judgment, a moment where he failed to grasp how his words would be perceived outside his own worldview. The interview didn't accuse him of a crime, but it reignited every suspicion that had followed him for years. Soon after the documentary aired, Jackson faced renewed legal scrutiny. In 2004, he was charged and later stood trial in what became one of the most closely watched court cases in entertainment history. In 2005, he was acquitted on all counts. Legally, he walked free. Publicly, the damage was permanent. Even after the acquittal, the interview continued to define how many people saw him. It overshadowed his music, his philanthropy, and his influence. Financial strain followed, compounded by mounting legal costs and declining public trust. By the time of his death in 2009, his reputation remained deeply fractured. That single televised conversation did not determine guilt or innocence, but it changed the narrative forever. Because once those words were spoken on camera, Michael Jackson was no longer just a musical icon. He became a figure forever tied to questions that no interview could. Number 5, Sheen, the revelation that divided public opinion. For much of his career, Sheen had cultivated a reputation built on excess. Tabloid headlines, volatile behavior, and public meltdowns had already reshaped how audiences viewed him long before 2015. By the time he sat down for his interview on the Today Show, many assumed there were no surprises left. They were wrong. In the televised interview, Sheen revealed that he was HIV positive, a diagnosis he said he had received 4 years earlier. The announcement was framed as a moment of truth, an attempt to reclaim control of a narrative that had spiraled far beyond him. He spoke calmly, almost clinically, describing the diagnosis as a turning point in his life. At first, the reaction was sympathetic. Many praised his willingness to speak openly about a stigmatized condition. Advocacy groups acknowledged the potential impact of such a high-profile disclosure. But as the interview continued, the tone shifted, and so did public perception. Sheen admitted that he had kept his diagnosis secret for years while continuing to have sexual relationships. He acknowledged that during that time, individuals had attempted to blackmail him over his condition. When pressed on whether his partners had been informed, his answers were careful but unsettling. He stated that in 2 instances, he had engaged in unprotected sex, though he emphasized that both partners were under medical supervision and had been warned in advance. For many viewers, that explanation wasn't enough. The calmness of his delivery, the lack of visible remorse, became a focal point of criticism. What some interpreted as composure, others saw as detachment. The interview split public opinion sharply, one side viewing Sheen as a man confronting a difficult reality, the other seeing recklessness and irresponsibility toward others. The fallout lingered. While the interview did not end his career overnight, it cemented a narrative that had been forming for years. Networks distanced themselves. Projects evaporated. The idea of a comeback grew increasingly distant as Sheen's name became inseparable from controversy rather than talent. This interview didn't expose a hidden scandal. It reframed an existing one. By choosing to go public in that moment, and in that way, Sheen ensured that his legacy would no longer be defined by his performances alone, but by a single revelation that left audiences arguing not just about what he said, but how he said it. Number 6, Tom Cruise, the interview that made Hollywood step back. In 2005, Tom Cruise was still one of the most powerful stars in Hollywood. Blockbusters, critical acclaim, and decades of box office dominance had made him nearly untouchable. His public image was carefully managed, intense, committed, but professional. That image cracked not in a film, but on a couch. It began with his now infamous appearance on The Oprah Winfrey Show. Cruise's energetic declaration of love, his jumping on the couch, and his breathless enthusiasm quickly became pop culture shorthand for something being off. While some brushed it off as harmless excitement, others sensed a loss of control. The moment went viral before viral was even the norm, but the real damage came shortly after. While promoting War of the Worlds, Cruise sat down with Matt Lauer on the Today Show. The conversation turned to actress Brooke Shields, who had spoken publicly about her use of antidepressants to treat postpartum depression. Cruise criticized her decision, dismissing psychiatry itself as a pseudoscience. The exchange was tense and deeply uncomfortable. Lauer pressed him gently, but Cruise doubled down. He spoke with absolute certainty, correcting, interrupting, and lecturing. To many viewers, the issue wasn't his personal beliefs, but the way he delivered them, with a tone that felt patronizing and dismissive of real medical struggles. Public reaction was swift. Mental health advocates pushed back. Media outlets replayed the interview repeatedly. What had once been dismissed as eccentric behavior now appeared more serious. Cruz's image shifted from confident superstar to unpredictable liability almost overnight. Behind the scenes, the consequences were real. In 2006, Paramount Pictures ended its 14-year relationship with Cruz, citing his increasingly erratic public behavior. Steven Spielberg, who had recently worked with him, publicly distanced himself from Cruz's actions, calling them unacceptable. Though both relationships would later be repaired, the rupture marked a rare moment when Hollywood collectively stepped back from one of its biggest stars. The interviews didn't end Tom Cruise's career, but they shattered the illusion of invincibility. For the first time, the public wasn't watching a character. They were watching a man speak and realizing that no amount of box office power could fully protect someone once the narrative slipped out of their control. Number 7. Paula Deen. The interview that revealed a silence for years. Paula Deen had built a brand on warmth and familiarity. Her Southern cooking shows presented her as welcoming, folksy, and comforting, someone audiences invited into their homes week after week. That image held strong until 2013 when a lawsuit forced parts of her private language and past behavior into public view. What followed was an interview meant to contain the damage. During a deposition connected to the lawsuit, Deen admitted that she had used racial slurs in the past and had once considered hosting a plantation-themed wedding. When these details became public, the backlash was immediate. Longtime fans were stunned, and sponsors began to distance themselves almost overnight. Soon after, Deen appeared on the Today Show to address the controversy. The interview was awkward from the start. Rather than directly confronting the hurt caused by her words, Deen focused on how common regret was, suggesting that everyone had said things they wished they could take back. She framed herself as someone caught in a media storm, struggling to understand how her past had suddenly defined her present. What viewers noticed most was what wasn't there. There was no clear, direct apology during the interview itself. Instead, Deen referenced a previously recorded apology video, pointing audiences elsewhere rather than owning the moment live on air. For many watching, the response felt deflective, more concerned with personal fallout than with accountability. The public reaction hardened. Major networks and corporate partners severed ties. Her cooking shows were canceled. Product lines disappeared from shelves. A brand that had taken decades to build unraveled in a matter of weeks, accelerated not just by the revelations, but by how she handled them when given the chance to speak directly. The interview didn't introduce new allegations. It confirmed a perception. By failing to meet the moment with clarity and remorse, Deen allowed silence to speak louder than words. The audience that once embraced her no longer recognized the person sitting across from the interviewer. Paula Deen didn't vanish entirely from public life, but she never regained the cultural presence she once held. That interview became a dividing line between the image America thought it knew and the reality it was suddenly forced to confront. Live on television. Number 8, Billy Bush, the tape that ended a career overnight. Before 2016, Billy Bush was a familiar face on American television. As a co-host on Today and a correspondent for Access Hollywood, he occupied a comfortable space in mainstream media, visible, well-connected, and largely uncontroversial. That position unraveled not because of a question he asked on air, but because of what he was caught hearing off air. The moment didn't even come from a formal interview. In footage recorded years earlier, Bush was riding on a bus with Donald Trump before a television appearance, unaware that microphones were still live. As the conversation drifted, Trump spoke graphically about women, boasting about unwanted advances and suggesting that fame granted him permission to behave however he pleased. Bush laughed along. That laughter became the problem. When the Access Hollywood tape surfaced publicly in 2016, it spread at a speed few media scandals ever had. Viewers weren't just reacting to what Trump said, they were reacting to Bush's presence, his silence, and his apparent amusement. In a moment where many expected discomfort or pushback, they heard complicity instead. The backlash was immediate. NBC suspended Bush almost as soon as the tape became public. Advertisers pulled away. Ratings dipped. Within days, his future at the network was effectively over. Shortly after, Bush resigned from Today, ending a career that had taken years to build and only minutes to destroy. In later interviews, Bush attempted to explain his reaction. He described being caught off guard, frozen in the moment, unsure how to respond to someone more powerful than him. He acknowledged that hearing himself laugh was painful and said he understood why audiences were angry. But for many viewers, the explanation came too late. The tape didn't show Billy Bush committing a crime. It didn't reveal a hidden scandal in his own words. What it exposed was something subtler: how easily silence can be interpreted as approval when cameras aren't supposed to be rolling. In the court of public opinion, that distinction mattered less than the feeling left behind. Billy Bush didn't lose his job because of a question he asked. He lost it because of a moment when he didn't say anything at all. Number 9, Megan Fox, the comment that got her shut out. At the height of her rise, Megan Fox seemed poised to become one of Hollywood's defining stars of a generation. Her breakout role in the Transformers franchise had made her instantly recognizable, and the industry was positioning her as a long-term box office draw. But in 2009, a single interview shifted that trajectory almost overnight. While speaking to Wonderland magazine, Fox reflected on her experiences working with director Michael Bay. What began as a candid discussion quickly crossed into dangerous territory. In describing Bay's behavior on set, Fox compared him to Adolf Hitler, a comparison that immediately overshadowed everything else she said. The remark exploded across the media. Headlines focused not on context or nuance, but on the comparison itself. The industry reaction was swift and unforgiving. According to Bay, it wasn't even his decision. Steven Spielberg, the franchise's executive producer, reportedly insisted that Fox be removed from Transformers as a result of the comment. Suddenly, doors began to close. Fox was no longer framed as outspoken or honest, but as unprofessional and volatile. Directors grew cautious. Studios hesitated. The label of being difficult, one of Hollywood's most damaging reputations, stuck fast, regardless of whether it was deserved. What made the interview so destructive wasn't anger or intent. It was scale. By invoking one of history's most universally condemned figures, Fox's criticism eclipsed its original purpose. The focus shifted away from working conditions or power dynamics and locked instead onto the perceived extremity of her words. She continued to work. She appeared in other projects. She even reunited with Bay years later on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles films, which he produced. But the momentum was gone. That interview didn't end Megan Fox's career, but it permanently altered how Hollywood viewed her. One sentence, spoken casually in print, proved enough to derail what once looked like a carefully mapped ascent. In an industry that values silence as much as talent, Fox learned publicly how costly speaking the wrong way can be. Number 10, John Mayer. The interview that froze his ascent. For a time, John Mayer seemed destined for a rare kind of longevity. Critics respected his musicianship. Fans embraced his emotional songwriting. By the late 2000s, Mayer was positioned as a crossover artist who could age into legend status, respected by peers and commercially relevant at the same time. Then came the interview that changed how he was seen. In 2010, Mayer spoke with Playboy magazine in a conversation that was clearly meant to be provocative. What emerged instead was a series of remarks that overshadowed his music almost instantly. He spoke crudely about past relationships, including high-profile romances with Jessica Simpson and Jennifer Aniston, framing intimate details in ways many found disrespectful. But it didn't stop there. During the interview, Mayer made racially charged comments, including comparing his own anatomy to white supremacist David Duke and using racial slurs. The remarks landed with immediate force. Context vanished. Headlines condensed the interview into its most offensive lines, and those lines spread rapidly. The backlash was swift and unforgiving. Fans expressed disappointment. Media outlets condemned the language. Even longtime supporters struggled to reconcile the thoughtful songwriter they admired with the voice coming through in print. Mayer quickly issued apologies, both on social media and in subsequent interviews. He acknowledged that he had tried too hard to shock, and that he had failed. But the damage was already done. What made this interview so career-altering wasn't a single offensive joke. It was the accumulation. The sense that Mayer had revealed something careless, even reckless, about how he viewed race, women, and fame itself. The conversation reframed him from serious artist to problematic personality almost overnight. While Mayer continued to release music and tour successfully, the trajectory changed. None of his singles released after the interview reached the top 25 of the US Billboard chart. A stark contrast to his earlier commercial peak. The path toward universal acclaim quietly closed. The interview didn't erase his talent. It didn't silence his guitar. But it placed a permanent filter over how his work was received. Every new release was heard alongside the memory of that conversation, that tone, those words. John Mayer didn't fall from the spotlight in flames. He stalled. And in an industry where momentum is everything, that pause proved to be the most lasting consequence of all. These interviews didn't just damage reputations. They froze them in time. For some, the fallout was immediate. Sponsors vanished, careers stalled, and the spotlight turned cold overnight. But for others, the consequences weren't loud at all. They lingered. In part two, the damage won't come from confessions or headlines. It will come from moments that seem smaller, interviews that didn't explode, but quietly followed them for years. Because sometimes the most dangerous interviews aren't the ones everyone remembers. They're the ones people stop talking about.